Okay, folks, we're going to get started here in like 30 seconds.
Is this coming through up there?
You might need to put it up a little higher.
How much higher I can go?
Put it on your lip.
Put it on my lip. Hello. Is there like a... So I can get it. That's right. You're going to stick it on right there. Yeah. Okay, is that any better, Kim? Is that coming through at all? Hooray. Thank you. Okay, welcome to session 1, everybody. This panel is going to be talking about emerging and disruptive technology in education. And just so that we have a little bit of level setting so that we know what we're talking about, basically we'll be the conversation will be about approaches or technologies that kind of force a rethinking of the way things are done. It's a very general way of putting it. In this context, we could be talking about tools for student reflection, interaction and collaboration, or content creation. And what I'd like to do, I should also mention that, do you have feedback on? Yeah. Is that one on? Yeah. Okay. I would kill that one. Yeah, we're going to have to figure out the dance of the whole me turn off. Yeah. We have one already. Okay. If you have questions that come up throughout the panel, please place them on the question tool or vote on ones you like. At certain points in the talk, I'm going to stop and read some of them. And then also, if people want to actually ask questions in person, you are welcome to do that too. I guess we'll figure out a microphone run out to the audience situation. So let's go ahead and get started with having the panelists introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their projects related to either emerging or disruptive technology. And then we'll get into some of the questions that were listed on the wiki as far as themes that we want to discuss. So let's start with James down at the end there.
Hi, I'm James Howell. I'm faculty in veterinary and biomedical sciences in the College of Agricultural Sciences, and I teach a first-year seminar for students who are coming into the majors in toxicology and immunology and infectious disease. And in that course, I have the students do some live bookmarking stuff, and they set up a blog, and I use their blog pages for them to do sort of an extension of in-class discussion of issues that come up in the class. And I found some really surprising things. One is that the incoming students tend to be, they're on Facebook like it's their job, and they're, on the iPhone all the time. But they're really kind of shy about actually creating content on the web. That surprised me. The other thing that we do is there's sort of a little wiki that you've never heard of called Toxipedia that is sort of a catalog of toxic chemicals. And we have a project where they work together and then make an entry for a chemical that's not in the database, and that goes in. This year what I'm going to do, and I'll let you know how this works next year, is to have them make Wikipedia entries and edit Wikipedia entries. So the deal is going to be, when you use Wikipedia to do research for your presentation, you have to improve that Wikipedia article with other stuff that you learn. So I'm going to see how they like that. And I'll talk about that more if people have questions, but now I'm going to turn it over to Cole.
Thanks, James. Cole Camp-Lease, Director of Education Technology Services and sometimes teacher in the College of Education. Before we start, I'd like everyone to close their laptops. This is highly disruptive for me to... No, I'm just kidding. I thought I'd go through the buzzword bingo to start the day off. So Flickr, Facebook, Web 2.0, Plone, Apple, We, Assessment, Adobe Connect, and Learning Design. How's that? Done. Okay. So what do I think and know about disruptive technologies? I spend my time in a group that really spends most of its time thinking and looking at disruptive technologies for teaching and learning. The thing that we try to do, though, is to integrate those into learning environments so that they're appropriate. So to try to figure out what works and what doesn't work. Because so many times, I think a lot of us get accused of this thing where we're really focused solely on the technology and not really on the teaching or the learning. And so what's interesting is that we have sort of this living laboratory in ETS where we can take our time and really review things and then work with faculty. You're going to hear from our faculty fellows later today, the things that they think about. Many would say very disruptive. I'm not going to talk too much right now about the course that Scott and I taught. We talked to you guys about that last year, and we're getting ready to teach that again this spring with new ideas. I'll let him mention most of those things. But it's just really cool to be able to come and see this many faces thinking about these kinds of things. And so what I'm hopeful for is that during this hour or whatever time we have is that you press us to talk to you a little bit about the kinds of things that you're thinking about. Because I think ultimately that's what makes all this go around. So with that.
Thanks, Cole. I'm Scott McDonald. I'm faculty in the College of Education. I'm in science education. And I have a background and interest in learning technologies from my PhD and really before that. And the work that I've been doing in disruptive technologies sort of covers a lot of territory, but Cole and I have been working together, as he said, on a course that ran in the spring of 2008 called Disruptive Technologies, which is convenient for this panel. And that was really about how these technologies play in teaching and learning spaces. And we took the term comes from Clayton Christensen, who's a social theorist at Harvard Business School. So it doesn't mean what most people think it means, which is things that interrupt class. But it really means things that have large-scale social implications in how they change the way that we interact with each other and how society works. So Cole and I ran that class in 2008. We're running again in 2010 in the spring. These new ideas he's talking about I haven't heard anything about, so I'm excited to hear what the new ideas are for the class. It'll be a grand experiment. One of the things that we know about the class is that there'll be something that came out of it that we didn't expect, because that's definitely what happened in spring of 2008. Twitter became, we call it the rise of Twitter. So we'll be interested to see what happens in 2008. I'm also interested in these issues because I'm now transitioning as of the fall into a role of the director of the Innovation Studio at the College of Education, and that studio is specifically focused on thinking about how these technologies play in higher education. So I'm interested in that transition in the fall.
Hello, I'm Karen Kiefer-Boyd, and I'm professor of art education and also affiliate professor in women's studies. And so I work within the School of Visual Arts, and I teach things like Web 2.0 pedagogies and new media and pedagogy. And recently, this spring, with a Fulbright at Klagenfurt University, taught visual culture and gender constructions and gender studies and activist art. And somehow, when I was talking to Brett and telling him a little bit about my class and what I was taught and such, I was invited to this panel, but I hadn't really considered so much that what I do is, I hadn't used the term really disruptive technologies, but what I do teach is activism. And so I think even the way that you've defined it, it's, you know, and of course I'm using new media and technologies to do that, as many artists are, so I'm looking at a lot of artists that do this and introducing these to my students, and then they create activists in Austria. There's a big need for that, as well as in the US, to change some of the injustices in the world. And so I come from that idea of participatory democracy, and I'm using the technologies in those ways. Some of the things, just simply to use things like Good Guide or Skin Deep, those programs, and you just put in, go through your house and put in the products you use in your house. And you can do this as I prepare people who are preparing to be teachers, art teachers. These are things that they can do with the young children they work with. And I know as a parent, my own kind of awareness of the environment, since I didn't grow up in that era, came through what my kids were bringing home and telling us, like, you can't eat this or you can't throw this away. And so the whole recycling stuff became really the kids teaching the parents. And so as I prepare people to be teachers, I prepare them to encourage their children to do this. So something like Good Guide, you put in the products from your home and it gives you a rating of the health performance, the environmental performance, and the social performance. So how the people are treated in all the production of it and the environment, and then your own health. Skin Deep, you just enter any kind of beauty products or body care products into that. So those kinds of things. And then in introducing artists, I introduce things like Coco Fusco and the use of FloodNet. And FloodNet is a kind of use of technologies with disrupting and diverting the direction of the traffic. So in cases of the women disappearing in Juarez and so on, so what they did, they used FloodNet, and there's a calling on the internet says, trying to get everybody to go to the site at the same time. And when you do, you scramble, and so that you close down a corporation or a government site for a short period of time. You can also redirect it to new information too. So that's the kind of thing that perhaps maybe that sounds like disruptive technology. I don't know, but it does give alternative kind of views. And so those are some of the things, and also just using YouTube and creating different kinds of alternative views, about gender, about sexuality, about all sorts of kinds of things, and presenting these views on something like YouTube, as well as any other kinds of things. But YouTube is a fairly popular place to go, and so I keep looking at those. Where do people go, and how can we put out new voices in there and disrupt the hegemonic views?
Just it seems like a good spot to talk about. One of the questions that's come in is sort of a definitional issue with disruptive technologies. And, panel, feel free to jump in here. My understanding with Christensen's term is really to differentiate it from what he calls sustaining technologies, which are improvements on... Okay, we're just going to go with the mic. Yeah. I think improvements on an existing technology in a broad sense. So one that would be relevant to us is, and again, someone jump in if I'm way off here, a new version of Angel would be an example of an innovation in a sustaining technology that already exists versus addressing some of those same student needs outside of something like a course management system. I don't know if that's helpful in understanding the differentiations. And I see Brad has actually sent people to Wikipedia, which is probably a good place to go. Well, I thought for the purposes of the panel, one approach we could use is to sort of talk about two kind of large themes. The first being students. So the way that you're using these technologies in your classes and the reaction that you've got from students and sort of the adoption of what they've and their experiences, and I'm sure there's interest in strategies on how you managed the process. And then the second half, if we have time, hopefully, I'd really like to move on to faculty issues. So issues that have more to do with the academy in a larger sense and its view of sort of new media, new digital scholarship, and the way that it's viewed. And so I think one thing that I think people might be interested in is what your impetus for adopting these new approaches were. So whoever wants to jump in, what were the sort of drivers? So using the terminology that we've talked about, what about the sustaining technologies were not meeting a need for you for your classes that required you to step outside and try something different?
So I teach this first year seminar, and I feel like a big part of what I'm trying to do in there is to just get sort of skills and literacy skills and study skills and persistence and independence kind of skills for the incoming students. And looking at it that way, having familiarity with these kind of communication skills and these kind of knowledge creation skills and knowledge, sort of information evaluation skills, like let's say using Wikipedia as a research, initial research tool. This isn't some kind of novelty, right? This isn't, you know, an extra. This is a basic literacy thing at this point. And so that's why I brought it into the classroom, because I felt like I would be doing the students a disservice if I didn't do it right off the bat.
I would say for us it was more about disrupting the patterns of practice that we have for our classes. So I think classes in higher ed, well in K-12 too, I'm concerned with K-12 as well, but in higher ed we have sort of ways that classes get run, and they're not very collaborative. They don't invite student voice very much. They're sort of, and this is not really new news, but I think we were intentionally bringing these technologies in an effort to break down those patterns, to try and say what happens when there's more than one channel of discourse. What happens when not all the information is coming from one place and going to another place? So I think we were really pretty intentional in our course in saying we don't know exactly how these technologies are going to work in this class, but we know that they're going to do interesting things, and we know that they're going to disrupt patterns. And we'll just see how that happens and go with it. I think it was relatively organic, but it was intentional in the sense that we really didn't want to do a class about technology. We wanted to do a class about how teaching and learning change when you use interesting technologies in ways that they haven't been used before.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. So even before Scott and I taught this course, I think that when I was teaching in the College of IST, which happens to be a square on the bingo thing, I was noticing that the students were less engaged than what I had hoped, even when we were doing really interesting things, even when we were doing things that I think that I felt as though they'd be really engaged in. And so in a lot of ways there was something about increased sort of mental energy related to it, where having them explore new environments. So Angel, while we all know it and love it, sometimes isn't the most inspiring place to have rich dialogue or conversation. So 5 or 6 years ago, we started introducing blogs into the classroom and saw just really ridiculous amounts of conversation happening. Now, that was very disruptive then. It's not all that disruptive now. And I think you see about the same level of discourse in a blog as you do in a course management system these days. But I think part of this has to do with really trying to figure out not necessarily where the students are spending their time or what they want from us, but really new ways to try to get them to participate. What I think a lot of us get tired of is walking into classrooms and seeing the laptops open and the computers and not knowing how to really engage them. And I just read an article in the Chronicle yesterday where there's some people talking about it's time to take computers out of classrooms, to return discipline and to return discourse. And you know, I think that what we're trying to do is we're trying to invent a new pedagogy to utilize these technologies. And I think that that was something Scott touched on. We didn't know how to deal with the fact that students had their heads down the entire time in our class. But what grew out of that were some sort of patterns and some sort of things that we sort of figured out about how do we actually engage students through the laptop. And that was a really startling sort of discovery for us, that there is massive amounts of discourse that can go on behind the scenes if you not just allow it, but you encourage it in a directed sense. So it's really about sort of discovery, I think, and engagement.
I wanted to mention one quick thing because Cole mentioned engagement a number of times, and I think that was really critical for us. And he was saying, you know, the laptop's up and it gives you a different sense. And so just looking at you all in the audience, most of you are not looking at us. Most of you are looking down. So that was an adjustment, I think, for Cole and I. But what we wanted to think about was engagement doesn't mean that the students are looking at you or that necessarily they're having fun, because that's typically, I think, what we talk about when we think, oh, the kids are really engaged. Well, you know, you're humorous. Or we were really interested in engagement, meaning engaged with intellectual activity, engaged with thinking about the problems that we're there to talk about. And if that engagement happened through Twitter or through Facebook or through a wiki, we didn't care. We weren't interested in where it happened. We were interested in the engagement, and I think that was our focus.
Well, I'm thinking that, why do I do this? And it really comes back down to that underlying belief of a lot of injustices going on in the world. And so, and one of the things that we need to do is bear witness to those injustices, share those things, listen to each other, and then envision something new. So there's this generative aspect of envisioning. So in working with students, and just a range of students, in fact, when I got my sort of the Fulbright orientation letter to teaching at Klagenfurt, it said the students don't, they won't come to your office, they're not going to speak to you, they're very formal, they expect lectures, don't expect discussion, it's not like the school classes in the U.S. and so on. And I thought, well, this, it's going to be a little odd since I kind of, participation and discussion is my way of working. But, in the first hour of the class, the students, I hardly had a chance to say anything. I just sort of set up a process. And the students were discussing, and later somebody, one of the students said, I had taken a gender studies class before, and so I thought I kind of knew everything. But after the first hour, I realized, how much I had learned. And there was no lecture. What I did was the day before in Klagenfurt, I went around and took photographs of their city center, and I pulled up a couple, and I asked a few questions and got them in groups talking and then telling me. So they were telling me about what they knew about, but I asked questions that they had never thought about those things in the same way. And so it's really just a pedagogical approach is kind of, how I do that. And so one of the things, even with something as simple as like iGoogle Doc, I can have like a group like this size in even a lecture hall kind of space like this, and it will appear silent. And the kind of things that is going on together, what we're doing here, is going to be more interactive than if I were to ask a question out here now and a couple people would raise their hand or call out or something like that. There's a kind of participation, so I can use that in real time, face to face, something like that. And but it's kind of what the questions you set up and how you connect to the things that they can contribute. I do a lot of visualizations getting down to what's really meaningful to them. I'll have them write privately and then take these discernments, and I'll even physically have a hat that they put them in, and then I'll pull those out of the hat, put them up here, so we know they're the discernments of some very meaningful thing that happened, but they don't have to say some private story to us, but the issue is up there. So it becomes in this iGoogle Doc, and that's why I can engage them in that kind of thing. So those are just a few strategies.
Okay, thanks. I actually want to back up real quick. I was originally on this panel to be a participant, and I actually neglected to introduce myself. I'm Ginn with the College of Engineering, and I'm going to break moderator protocol and actually answer my own question, which I hopefully can do well. So our challenge with the classes I was working on in the College of Engineering were that we were teaching a simultaneous engineering course at 4 campuses across the Penn State system. And we had made the decision to require a 4 to 6 minute documentary video as the assignment. And we wanted cross-campus collaborative distributed work teams. So it introduced all kinds of pressures with the infrastructure that was available, and also it was the first time that we had kind of tried anything like that before. The driver for us was actually accrediting agencies in the College of Engineering that had information from employers that people who could work in distributed work teams effectively would have an advantage in the workplace. It was something that companies were asking for more and more. So so our driver was really, I guess, more of a immediate, practical matter of addressing accreditation holes that we had found. So that's going to segue to the next one, which I've seen a few times on here already, and is always relevant to probably everybody in this room, which is the actual adoption or the managing of the introduction of something like this, some new approaches. There are a couple of different models. We in the College of Engineering had discussed possibly even like having the students sit down with tech people. I should mention that we used the Digital Commons resources for the video, and they set up workshops for us at all campuses, and it was kind of I think a test for how that system would work in a cross-campus sort of collaborative way too. But I'd be interested to hear what your approaches were on sort of a in-class practical level as far as what kind of pushback you got. What were your approaches? Did you take time out to introduce these technologies, step them through? Did you point them to resources elsewhere? Did you have them rely on one another? It's probably a combination of the three, but I'll stop talking now so somebody else can actually chime in with what they experienced in their class.
You know, I found honestly that it's best just to sort of like open the floodgates and see what happens. And there is an immense amount of pushback. I mean, even in the class Scott and I taught together, there were, when we first introduced Twitter, and you have to remember that when we did this, Twitter was not really what it is today, right? It was 2.5 years ago or so, or 2 years ago, and so people were, nobody had anybody in their networks, nobody was following anybody, they didn't even really know what it meant to like use the @ symbols and all the stuff that we just sort of take for granted now as we've invented this new language in this space. We actually got an email about the 3rd week from a student who said, "This is absolutely ridiculous. This is the stupidest thing I've ever seen in my life, and I want out. I don't want to use this technology." And I think Scott and I responded to that with, you know, this is part of what the future is going to look like for you as a teacher, and it's important for you to stick with it and explore and continue to press. And honestly, by the 5th or 6th week, it went from this is the stupidest thing to I can't believe I've lived my life without this technology. Yeah. I'm so connected to my classmates. I'm so connected to my peers. And I've seen that pattern repeat itself over and over again. I've seen students, when I do podcasting, say, why in the world would I listen to you lecture once and then listen to you again, only to have them report that it helped them study for tests. I've had them introduce blogs, and they say, I can't understand what's going on here, I don't know where to click, and 8 minutes later they have the beginnings of an e-portfolio set up. So it's very different than what you're talking about, Gary, with sort of with video conferencing tools and stuff that really are very complex, even for pure IT people. The kinds of technologies that I think many of us are exploring, Karen, you mentioned Google Docs, you mentioned Google Docs. That's another thing that, metaphorically, it's the same as what we're used to. It just adds this wonderful piece of collaborative opportunity to it. So I think more and more we're going to see that what is initially very disruptive only stays disruptive for a few moments, and then you have to get down to the business of sort of changing your practice with the technologies.
What I find is that high demands for engagement are high demands for engagement, and high demands for participation are high demands for participation, and students don't like them. Students, maybe this is just bush bashing, but I think that the generation of students that's coming in now haven't ever experienced anything but the No Child Left Behind sort of paradigm, and so they're extremely passive. I mean, maybe I'm sounding like my dad, but they're extremely passive when they come in. So I don't give lectures in this course. I have the students prepare and deliver the lectures in the course. It's very conventional, no technology. I mean, they use PowerPoint, right? But I decided that rather than me slapping together a 20 or 30 minute stack of slides that I then extemporaneously, because that's, I mean, let's face it, that's all we have time to do, right? I mean, this is how busy faculty put together lectures. Students think I'm lazy for doing it this way, but meeting with them for an hour is more time than I would have spent actually preparing for the lecture anyway. So it's not for me saving time, it's to get them engaged. And they crap their pants when I tell them that they have to do the lecture. But at the end, they get so much out of it that I think they get it. So one of the background questions here, and maybe we'll get to it, and I'm sorry if I jumped the gun, but this question of the jargon, disruptive technology, it has pros and cons, right? Like you would never go to I would never go to my department head or my dean and say, dude, I'm so excited about this disruptive thing I'm going to do.
You call your department head dude? That's more disruptive than saying.
Yeah, that would sort of be the equivalent if I dropped that bomb. So students they're just as I think they're just as resistant to having responsibility for learning technology and engaging with it as they are standing up in front of the class and engaging the class.
Well, I think I can connect this to administration as well, because this belief of mine about, well, really, you know, in the preparing of a presentation and such, that's actually, you know, it's part of how you learn. But if I'm the teacher and I'm doing all the learning, then the students aren't doing the learning. So, you know, that's kind of the philosophy behind I do things like what you just described there. And so, in other words, the content comes from the students. I set up processes. And so that, and the processes are very important and very deliberately set up. And that's how in cultures and situations where people aren't comfortable speaking, it does happen because the processes are, you know, 30 years of teaching and figuring out some processes. And so this idea that content comes from the students is not a very easy thing for the replication of my classes when they're online. And this is a dilemma that I, you know, am dealing with and trying to develop graduate courses in which, you know, even more so, but I would do the same with my undergraduate courses and do the same, that the content comes from what happens there. So there's a lot of, you know, you can just use also things like Digo where the students just put the feed right into the course. So these kinds of things where they're constantly creating this stuff. Now, it's very important what that process is. It's not like anything goes, but that the students developing the content. And so I still don't know really how to work with that because administratively, online classes and through the World Campus, you know, a big thing, and it's, you know, with this economic crisis and budget cuts and everything, yes, those World Campus courses bring in a lot of money, and they bring in a lot of money when they're large classes, they're replicable, and the students are not developing the content. And so I, you know, I'm struggling with that right now, so I kind of raise that to everybody else.
Yeah, I want to build on what Karen said and actually respond to something Jim said, which is I'm not sure our students are passive. I think we just don't know how to engage with them. And I think this is a pattern that we've seen over generations and generations, right? I mean, we look out at the class and we say, you know, if I'm an instructor and I'm looking out at you guys, I'm saying you're not engaged, right? I mean, really. It's 90% of you, as I said before, are not even looking at me. So the question is, like, is our problem that our students aren't engaged, or is our problem that we're expecting them to engage the way we did when we were students? And frankly, if you remember when you were a student, it wasn't that interesting, at least for most of us, and we weren't engaged that way either. So I think this sort of conservatism in the sense that, well, the students aren't like they were in my day, I think actually they are, and I think the only thing that changes is the way that they interact and the technologies they use to interact. And that's exactly, I think, the function of courses like the one that Cole and I ran, which is to say, we don't know these technologies. We use them a little, but many people, especially our students, use these technologies all the time, Facebook and things like that. And so, so I think we have to get beyond saying that there's something wrong with our students and really say there's something wrong with our pedagogy, and that. And again, I think the engagement doesn't mean that it has to be fun and you have to, you know, be their Facebook friend. But I think you do have to push them to think and say that, you know, you're here to be in a rigorous academic environment, and rigorous means that you have to do some thinking and not just listen to me talk all the time, because that's not rigorous. That's boring. I'm going to go with boring.
Yeah, and so this whole notion of disruption, and Carla actually tweeted it, and this is so meta, by the way, so like you're not looking at me, I'm not looking at you, I'm watching myself on Ustream, and I'm seeing people Twitter comments to me. It's absolutely incredible. But Carla has this statement where you can't explore new pedagogies without first adopting a stance of valuing student voice and engagement. And I think that that's a really important point here, is that, you know, we want to attack these things, we want to do all these things, but if we're doing it in the same old model, and that's me standing up in front of a room projecting out, you're not going to have engagement whether you're using Google Docs or Digo or blogs or Twitter or anything else. There has to be something about the two-way street. And I think that that may be the largest disruption that we can impose on our classrooms, and that's turning over a little bit of the control of the classroom, at least in my mind in a lot of ways.
So I think we're finally getting to the nut of it here. That maybe a better word for disruptive, I don't know. I think what we're disrupting is the paradigm, right? And we talk about paradigm shifts, and it sounds so abstract, but actually a paradigm shift is a really mundane thing. So, right, if you understand that you can no longer have control over your classroom, then you're on one side of the paradigm shift. And if you're somebody who's grasping and trying to keep that control, you're on the other side, right? It's like the, you know, your brain can only see one or the other, right? It's like the optical illusion, the old lady, the young lady, right? And you're pretty likely to have administrators above you who are on one side of the fence and you're on the other side, right? So I guess that's my point. But if you embrace this, then you have to be willing, right, to be in front of a classroom where you have to, I don't know if this is the right word, but compete for the attention of the students. And that's where we all are, and you either realize it or you don't. I guess that's how I feel about it.
Okay, well, I saw from Twitter that answering my own question was a big hit, so I'm going to give the people what they want. Yeah. So Chris Long asks, there's a question, one of the tied for the lead here about passive learning. The only thing I wanted to say on this is, we're lucky in Leonard Center and the College of Engineering to be able to have full-time assessment team as part of our group, and we're actually able to run assessments on all the classes we run. We've run 3 semesters of this course that I had mentioned earlier, and my favorite story from the data that we've gotten back is that the students don't like, well, let's see, the videos take too much time and they're too much work, but we shouldn't get rid of them, and they prefer them over other traditional assessment techniques. So it really is kind of speaks to this idea that if it goes well, you can actually be sort of empowering the students to be more active in creating something that I guess does give an additional voice to what they're used to. I will say, though, that mid-semester, when it really ramps up, the level of pushback in those classes is pretty overwhelming, to the point where they've self-organized a few semesters and kind of sent group emails and wanted to write a paper and change the whole thing midstream. So it's definitely kind of pulling people along, which is another bridge to our next topic, which I think everybody would be interested in as well, and is not always everyone's favorite topic, but assessing these new approaches is something that comes up a lot, and we've got all kinds of stuff out there as far as rubric approaches and different best practices. I'm curious to know how you all went about the assessment portion of the technologies that you had incorporated, as far as grading them or participation or
Start with the fact that we had no idea, right? That was the big thing. We had no idea that what we were doing was going to impact the class so fundamentally. We had all this assessment set up to do all sorts of other things, right? Where they had to write these reflections and read these articles and do this and do that. But then what exploded was this massive back-channel participation. And we had no way of assessing it. We were completely caught off guard. And I think that at the end of the day, those are the kinds of things I think we learned from it. I mean, we walked into the class saying it was a grand experiment, not really realizing that what we would have were all these unintentional outcomes that sort of shocked our system, to say the least.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, how do you measure participation when 20% of it is in Twitter and 15% of it is in a wiki and 20% more is in a podcast, and then some other percentages and stuff in media that you're not even aware that the students are using to talk to each other. Yeah. So I think it is a really, really tough question, and I don't. Yeah.
Well, I don't think we have the answer for like the 350-person section that happens, all the time on this campus. I mean, the class that we're talking about here had 20, master's and doctoral students. So it was a whole different world, and while they were really good at the rigor piece, the technology crushed them.
Unless they were good at the technology piece, and then they got crushed by the rigor. Yeah, so they had to pick their poison.
Yeah. So I think your mileage may vary. I think is a great answer.
The way the course, this first year seminar course is designed is that it's meant to have a lot of discussion and participation. So the metric that I use is really crude. If a student speaks, they get a check mark next to their name on the roster, right? So I don't take attendance, I take participation. It's incredibly crude. All they have to do is speak, okay? And some of them just resolutely will not speak. You know, even though if they go 2 or 3 meetings without speaking, I'll say, you know, you haven't spoken for the last 2 or 3 meetings, and they say, I know, and you know, I guess they can't. So they're allowed to sort of make up for that, not quite 100%, but they make up for that by blog posts or commenting on other people's blog posts, and I'll let them do that. But you know, this is all experimental. One thing that I like to do in the course, because before I did this, I noticed that students were, you could see the wheels turning. Things were coming out of their mouth that I could tell they were trying to guess if they were saying the thing that I wanted to hear. You know, this was especially true when it came to you know, if we talked about stem cells or anything controversial. So what I tell them is, look, I'm just another participant. The moderator. The presenter moderates the discussion, and I have to wait to be called on too. So I'm just another participant. And Microsoft Excel generates your grade. I have no input into what your grade is. Okay, it's just a numerical thing. So that helps to disinhibit the discussion. But it does make it a little bit mechanical. So what I think I will do for this, the real trick is that the presenter is not evaluated by me. The presenter is evaluated by the peers, and I have this little rubric that, you know, people make little marks on, and sometimes I worry that everybody just pegs the needle and gives really high marks. But if you look at the numbers at the end of the semester, it's clear that there's enough variance that they're actually exercising some discernment. So I think that's how I'm to answer the question that's on the live tool here. I think that's how I'm going to evaluate the Wikipedia authoring that people are going to have to do, is, you know, basically in some kind of rubric form to say, is what they contributed weak or not, right? And as time goes on, I'll probably find ways to you know, refine that. But as a first stab, I think the peer evaluation can really help to sort of, it also disinhibits, people don't crap their pants as much if they know that, yeah. Okay.
Well, I tie the assessment in with the pedagogy, and I think of it as another form of teaching. And so, like if they're creating new media art, and so how are we going to assess this? Well, I could give them how to assess it. We could look at, you know, how this is juried and rubrics from that. But then how do I know that they, you know, have they learned anything what new media art is? And so, like, you could take any topic like this. And so they come up with the rubrics. I have them work in groups, and they, you know, speak out, and we have to come to consensus. And so now it's in their language, it's, you know, what they understand, what they decide that they can actually create this thing within the time frame and such. And so they create, so I actually, in them creating this assessment, I am learning how much they have learned or not. And so I can, you know, just work with that through discussion and such. And so it's so linked, my assessment is so linked to the content and the pedagogy that it's really close to seamless.
Great. Okay, well, it looks like we're actually 1 minute past halfway, and I had hoped to do student stuff first and talk about sort of faculty or institutional issues in the second half. So things are going well, but does anyone have a question they want to ask in real life that they don't want to put on the tool? Otherwise, we'll just move on. Let me real quick. Yeah.
Cole and I were both noticing that Chris Long posted a question, what are the pedagogical objectives that are met with the disruptive technologies? So I think we're going to try and address that one. I mean, for me, the biggest one is that it provides a formative assessment for the faculty members. So it gives you a way to take the pulse of the class that you can't do in almost any other way. So I think pedagogically, I mean, we've talked about student voice, and I think that's a huge piece of it, but I think pedagogically why you want that student voice is so that you can make midstream adjustments. You can say, well, okay, there's a push to move over into this area and start talking about this, or there's some confusion about an area that we want to delve more deeply into. So I think, for me, that's a huge piece of how these technologies support pedagogy in interesting ways. And, you know, quickly, because it's also related to pedagogy, Ann Taylor has one about the larger enrollment classes, and I think, you know, if we want to talk about disrupting a paradigm, that's something I'd like to see disrupted. I mean, I think I'm hard-pressed to see the argument for a 350-person lecture hall class, but we can talk about that more.
You can come to your department head's budget meeting next month and find the answer to that out. So I think a lot of it does start with objectives, and I think what ended up happening, or what happens is that we attempt to push for the outcomes that we're looking for based on the objectives through the use of technology in a lot of cases. So in the case of our course, I mean, part of the thing we did was we looked at 3 overarching themes, you know, community, identity, and design. And what we wanted to do was to allow the students to feel what it meant to be part of a community. And the ways that we participate so much now are through these computer-mediated social communities. And I think part of it really was that, Chris, is that we wanted to be able to demonstrate, we wanted people to be able to actually live in the same kinds of environments that we feel so comfortable in and feel the power of community firsthand. Identity is so tied to all of these places that we sprinkle little pieces across the web, right? You have pictures on Flickr, links on Delicious, and so forth and so on, that we wanted them to experience fractured identities. And so again, pedagogically, we used the social networks and the web to allow that to manifest itself. So in a lot of ways, it really had very little to do with us coming up with these structured objectives like a lot of us as designers do, right? It really were these overarching themes, and we felt as though the only way to really demonstrate this stuff in a short period of time, because let's get real, 15 weeks is not a lot of time for students to get this stuff that we've been living for the past 5 or 6 years. So it's a, you know, so embedding them in that culture, I think, in our case especially, had a lot to do with sort of reaching those objectives.
Well, when you think about disruptive technology or otherwise, you actually have to stop traffic. You have to stop things the way that they have been happening. And so that example with FloodNet is one way. But I think pedagogically you have to think about, like, how do you really disrupt, actually disrupt the technologies themselves, disrupt the chairs screwed down on the floors like this with this audience kind of thing. How do you disrupt those things to get to these things such as community and collaboration and learning?
Great. Okay. Well, there'll be plenty of time, I think, at the end if we want to have any revisiting of in the class issues. But I wanted to make sure we had a little bit of time to talk about something that I've been interested in following in terms of the way activity in this area is viewed by the institution, by academic institutions. So there's been a lot of recent press on revisiting the way that universities look at new forms of digital expression, and especially for research purposes. And I wanted to take a moment to read something. This is actually from yesterday's Inside Higher Ed that I thought was interesting, and I'll try to explain why I'm reading you this afterwards. But it says there was a survey of political science departments, and it was across bachelor, master, and doctoral granting institutions. Survey found that scholarship of teaching ideas by Ernest Boyer, in which colleges would see research and publication related to pedagogy or teaching as counting, has not been embraced by a majority of departments in any sector and by relatively few at doctoral institutions. Asked if they agreed that teaching publications and substantive publications, so this would be publications within the discipline of the academic person, are equal in tenure reviews. In evaluating research, only 11% of chairs at the doctoral institutions agree. So this group is sort of in a unique situation because we're oftentimes offered opportunities to potentially collaborate with faculty members on research. And this I found not surprising, but somewhat disappointing. And I think it does kind of speak to. Now, this doesn't actually mention technology specifically. It just mentions teaching issues. And I'd be interested in getting people's views on what we could do. This group is organized, obviously, we're all here. Is there a way that this group could do something or contribute in some way to increasing the perceived value of the teaching aspect and technology in teaching, for the institution sort of at large? So I'd be interested to know what people's thoughts on what people's thoughts are on that, and if they have any ideas about steps that could be taken, or if you've perceived any changes in the last few years as far as have you been encouraged to be more involved with these sorts of things? Do you think they're valued within your departments, or are you exploring these because more of a personal interest in the technologies or possibly a passion for improving teaching, things like that?
I think it depends on the department, depends on the institution. In my particular case, I don't have a tenure track appointment, but I'm on a track where I can get promoted. And I don't have a research lab, I don't have graduate students, so it's not possible for me to have conventional publications. So I'm hoping that the progress that I make on this sort of thing will, and presuming that will count towards my promotion. But that's a pretty unconventional thing. I think that as the 21st century sort of rolls along, there's going to be more unconventional kinds of academic appointments like mine. Although so I think this is the issue, right, with this economic crisis that we're in. I think it's going to depend on leadership to decide whether they want to pull in their horns and be conservative and go back to the 20th century, which a lot of them are going to have that reflex, right? Or if they're going to think, well, let's push through and move forward and rely on this sort of thing more and see if this can take us through. And you're probably going to see, even within a single office, you'll see leadership sort of go back and forth on this. And again, it's going to depend on where you are in particular. But I think, and probably all of us are thinking about this, right? Because this is where to one extent or another, we've all sort of bet our careers on this. And so I guess it just behooves us to be communicating upward about how important this stuff is. Yeah, so that's something to think about.
Well, I guess I'm full professor, and I've actually been tenured twice. The last time was here. It was early tenure. I went up for early tenure and full professor at the same time. So I don't really fit into categories very well. And I'm invited all over the world to, people of South Korea, all over the place to present about what I do, but a lot of it is I guess you would call it more conventional publications, the books and the articles and such. So, all I can say is like you do a lot of things, and you do some things in, I guess conventional ways. Some of my, part of though, for me, it's like, the things, well, it's so complicated, and so just to say, like when I asked a mentor of mine, what is art education? And she said, it's whatever we make it, and there's a lot of us making it. I took her seriously, and I kind of created this, like, what I do in this discipline, and I'm seen as a leader, and, and this is what gets me all over the place, and tenure and promoted and so on. So I'm able to create what's happening in my field. I don't know if everybody else, is in that position or can do that or wants to do that or whatever, but it's kind of like not looking at the boundaries, but looking at, where do I want to take something? So it's like I really model exactly what I said about envisioning something. Once you envision something, you can work towards it. And I believe that in a global way, and I believe that in a personal way, and I try to model that.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, those were very interesting. One of the things that I've noticed that have come up in these sort of press stories either Chronicle of Higher Ed or Inside Higher Ed, there's sort of a continuing thread that there's an assumption that things will change with a generational shift. So there's this idea that there's this cohort of administrators who don't like anything, and they eventually are going to go retire, and we're going to have this this whole different landscape where things are valued more. And I guess the reason that article really kind of resonated with me is that I don't necessarily know that it's so, and there's not really any evidence except for sort of wishful thinking. So one of the things that I was excited about with this panel and with this group is I really do believe we certainly have enough numbers, to sort of start thinking more about what our role could be in helping to change perceptions of these new digital scholarship approaches, and the kinds of things we could do to make it mutually beneficial for faculty and for a unit like ETS or World Campus. But I think that's the big issue that I was curious about on the sort of institutional side. So it's not something I heard from the panel, but I would be interested to know, and names aren't necessary, is there a general perception that things are becoming, that people are more amenable to considering these kinds of activities and value them?
So I think that is a myth, just as like the whole myth of the digital native permeates higher education and education in general. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all sort of getting this together. So this isn't really an issue where our students are really wired any differently. I've grown tired of hearing those arguments that our students, they all still rate themselves very low as technology experts. I mean, when we ask them these questions, they always come back and tell us that they're novices. We just see them navigate social environments, and we think, oh, well, they must know how to use technology to solve problems. And it's just like administrators. I don't see like any more barrier today than there was 10 years ago, and I don't see any less of one happening 10 years from now. I think that good scholarship will always be valued at a place like Penn State. So whether or not there's this increased awareness to the way technology can help things, yeah, sure. I mean, our administrators, I mean, the people I work with are on Facebook, right? I mean, our CIO is a blogger. Our president is on Facebook. So it's not like they're developing a comfort level with these technologies. Whether or not people are going to say, hey, go teach your class this way or that way any more today than yesterday, no, that's not going to happen. I mean, we've embraced technology. We have the World Campus. We deliver thousands of enrollments via distance education. So all that's happened, and I don't think it's going to take a new generation, this is just personally a new generation of administrators to make it happen. It's going to take better awareness of how to utilize the technologies effectively to either support your scholarship or to support your teaching. So retirements are retirements. I mean, I have just as many good friends who are faculty who are coming towards the end of their career as those who are at the beginning of their career who rocket with technology. I mean, honestly, both ends of that spectrum are covered very well at this institution and others. I see it all over the country, too.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, I think there are institutional barriers, but I don't think they're connected to people who are in particular positions. I think we just have patterns of the way the university functions, and because of those, there are challenges. I don't. Yeah, I mean, I don't know about the activism question that I guess both Karen and Gary have raised about how we can be activists for this technology.
Just keep doing great work.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, that's really the.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay.
Keep on rocking.
I'm done then.
But what is, like I see that, good scholarship is rewarded and at Penn State and these kinds of things. And so it's not to me so much about, the adoption of the technologies and such. I do think that the issue of pedagogy being shaped by the online environment and the issue of revenue is a big thing, because if you need really, really large classes and you need to hire people for, GTAs and such to teach these many, many sections, to bring in a lot of money budget-wise for your program, what happens to the quality of those kind of kind of classes. And so I have no answer to this, but this is as, trying to develop a graduate program, smaller classes, and I've been able to create one, but there's, these obstacles about, will it bring in enough money? And it can't just break even. It has to, bring in lots of money. And so, this is the dilemma. It's not so much administrations only because they're under pressure with their budgets.
Okay. So we're going to take a step back from the serious issues a little bit. We have a request from Jamie that we have you prognosticate on what's coming. And may I just say that we are now 2+ hours into this, and nobody has mentioned a certain upcoming technology that I thought this whole day would be all about. So if you have that on your cards, stay tuned, because I think we're going to hear it. It doesn't, you can talk about your upcoming. Well, it seems like there was some reluctance to talk specifically about what you're. Is that going to be a surprise for your class? Well, so you can talk about what you have coming up for your class, or in a broader sense for implications for technology, but something that you see on the horizon.
Thank you.
You say it. Don't make me say it, because everybody's.
Google Wave.
Yeah. Fill out your square.
Yeah, and haptic. I've been waiting all. I was really trying to work that into something I was going to say, and I just couldn't, because it would just sound funny, I think. I don't know. Do we want to talk about Google Wave?
Is that your prediction? The future?
I don't know if you can predict something that's already happened. So I think it'll be interesting to see what Google Wave looks like in spring of 2010 when Cole and I teach our class. I think we're going to use it. I think there's a lot of, Google is doing amazing stuff. Google Voice is, blowing my mind, some of the stuff that they're doing with that. I think there's a lot, and Twitter, I think, is a perfect example of the blind side in technology. We just never know what the big new thing is going to be. So I'm not sure, I guess. I think Google Wave is going to be really fascinating. I don't know exactly why or how, but I'll be interested to see. But I'll let other people respond. Cole and I were just sort of in a very 20, maybe even 19th century way whispering to each other during the panel here about the tenure, because a lot of people have brought up tenure. And I guess we want to talk about that a little bit, but do you want to prognosticate?
I just think we'll see more of the same, and the more of the same means increased hyperconnectivity. So the network effect will just get louder and louder. And so Google Wave, whether it's Google Wave or even an enhanced use of Twitter and the use of almost a predictive market, if you will, to be able to investigate what students are saying and identify trends in your classroom. I think that in a lot of ways, if you embrace some of these things Scott was mentioning earlier, what you have is you have the ability to really shift your course on the fly. If they're participating and they're participating responsibly, you're seeing things flow at you if you're paying attention in ways that you didn't before. I think Google Wave, yes, is something that's very exciting to a lot of people. And if you haven't watched the demo, it's a good hour and 20 minutes to spend watching it. It took me about 4 days to watch the whole thing because I kept going, oh my God, like the whole way through it. But really all that these things are is they're a rethinking of email and the way people create documents and the way they collaborate. We're moving from let me send you an email and wait for you to respond to me to a real-time conversation and then construction of knowledge. I really want to explore Google Docs even more in class. One thing that we didn't do, and Liz had pointed it out, that they used to pass notebooks around and take sort of collaborative notes. Why aren't we doing more of that? That's something I think that I really want to explore. And that's not disruptive or emergent, but to have them all in one Google Doc and project the Google Doc up there and see them collectively sharing knowledge and constructing knowledge and dropping in things, that may be more ultimately productive than Twitter. I don't know. But I just think the ability to communicate like that and collaborate on things is what's really going to be, that's the big change over the next year or two, is just an increased speed with which people are connected and how they use those connectivities, or those connections. Yeah.
I have no predictions to make, but the speech that I give over and over again to the freshmen in my seminar is that, while we mortals are not given to see the future, that's exactly the point, right? if you look at a sort of a marginal horizon of the last 6 months, the last year, the last 2 years, Twitter sort of looks inevitable, right? Facebook looks kind of inevitable. But if you look back 5 years or 10 years, nobody saw this coming, right? And so that's an important lesson for students to have. You got to keep swimming. I mean, with these technologies and with the actual content of the course, which is molecular biology, this idea of lifelong learning is not anything abstract at all. It's very concrete for them, right? There's every week, every month, there's more things coming, and you gotta stay on top of them. So that's the lesson that I want to give the students.
Okay. It's a good, so new technology on the horizon. It's a good segue back to the #1 vote getter from Matt. How we sort of make sure students are not spending all of their time learning how Google Wave works, and not actually concentrating on course issues. I can sort of talk a little bit about our approach, because we had engineering students who had, first of all, never taken any kind of, it was an ethics course, so they had never taken any kind of philosophical course at all. For the most part, I think we had 1 or 2 throughout the 3 semesters. But the main technology issue was, of course, they had never, again, there are a few here and there, but they had, by and large, not made any videos before or edited things or researched any kind of documentary, compiled statistics to put, throughout it. So I'll just talk really briefly about what we did, which was rely heavily on other groups and people to sort of take care of the technology aspects. So we had online resources from Digital Commons. We had real in-person workshops for one team member from each team. We weren't really able to accommodate all of them. And then allowed them to self-organize as far as who the editors for each of the teams were. Without that, I think the project would have been much, much more difficult. So it's sort of an outsourcing in a way of the technology aspects of it. I think it definitely helps to be using tools that were relatively simple. I mean, this wasn't something that required, I think the workshops are 45 minutes. We had them go through one workshop for 45 minutes. I'm sure there was trial and error on the students' part, but yeah, as far as what you do to sort of limit how much energy the students are spending on these technologies, what are your thoughts on that? Go ahead.
Okay. Well, part of that empowerment is to be able to use it, but to use it to figure out how to use it on your own. And so that's really where I direct them, and sometimes I model. Okay, like you ask me a question, I have no idea, so I'll do a search, and here's like 5 answers, and go from that. And so from that point on, then they will answer those questions. I do a lot of things where, all this different open source, and it's like use something, like if I want them to do an animation on, like I don't care what program they use, and or putting something up with YouTube, like there's Second Life and Machinima, and there's different things, but it's more the content that I'm working on, and here's the resources, and if what people need to, what my students need to learn is how to go out, find, figure out, and solve the problems of how to use the technology. It doesn't help if I'm solving it for them. They won't have me next to them all their lives. So even though they would like that, some of them, but that's not going to happen. And so that's kind of how I approach it, is that I'm teaching them how to learn, solve their problems, technological problems as well as other problems.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of a red herring to worry about teaching kids about technology. Or teaching anybody about technology. I think you have to, as Karen said, I mean, part of their job is to be able to find the tools that they need to solve the problems that they're going to solve. And so what you want to do, and this goes back to the assessment issue, is pose problems that force them to be thoughtful and give you products. I agree that what Cole and I ran into was the backside of that, which is then you get a bunch of products and you got to figure out how to assess them. So, that's hard, when you get people that do really interesting and innovative pieces and turn them in as a final assessment, and you have to sit around and say, well, what do you do with this? Heather Hughes is here, and her product for our class was a mashup of blogs and Google Maps, and I mean, it was great. And what do you do with it? Well, you admire it, and then you try and figure out what you're going to do with it. So I think the point is that often those of us who are really comfortable with technology, our safety zone is to teach the technology as opposed to deal with the real issues that the technology is there to solve. So I think that's why you see a lot of ed tech classes become, today's about PowerPoint, next week will be about Word, the week after that will be about inspiration, and then you'll go figure out how to use it in teaching. And I think that model, needs to be killed. We need to stop thinking about the technology first, and we need to start thinking about the pedagogy and the learning first, and using those tools as an afterthought, as a way to support what you're trying to accomplish. So I agree with Karen. I think teaching the technology lets everybody off the hook. It lets the teacher off the hook. It lets the students off the hook. And I'm not about that. I'm not about letting them off the hook.
At the risk of belaboring the point, this skill is really one of the things that I want the class to be about. Not just the skill of learning how to edit Wikipedia, which is you'll figure it out if you poke around a little bit. It's really sort of the meta skill of having the confidence, and there's no way, if you don't have it, there's no way to get it without learning to swim with the jump in the deep end method.
Okay, so I'm out of questions now. So we're going to go to, well, let's see. Do we feel like, someone chime in the room here, do we feel like we've talked about the passive learning thing, or are people interested in retouching on that one? I tried to talk about it a little bit. Passive learning, passive learners. Yeah.
There continues to be a lot of questions about large enrollment classes, and I can tell you that it's changing on campus. It is. I mean, as more faculty embrace the use of technology, more and more courses are being adjusted with, I wouldn't call them disruptive technologies, but enhanced by technology in the right way. I think we're seeing less death by PowerPoint, which is a really great thing. We still see it, but I think less of it. Because remember, we used to say, oh yeah, I teach with technology, I use PowerPoint, and everybody thought that was really cool. And then it was, I teach with technology, I use Angel, and everybody thought that was really cool. I think over the next couple of years, you're going to see, by the way, YouTube is the #3 technology used by faculty at this university. How do we use it, though? We use it like we do old, yeah, right? We use it like we used to wheel the carts with the TVs in it and show people videos. Ooh, look at this. I think you're going to see faculty really embrace the idea that the web is a platform for collaboration and for communication. So that's the big change that's going to happen. I really, really believe that. So in large enrollment classes, Keith asked the question, Ann's been asking the question, you can't throw all this at students, especially at a distance. I think that's too disruptive because we don't want to teach the technology. It's something I heard these folks say. It's that, but there are pieces that really shatter what kids can do. I mean, the use of Twitter for activism is an amazing thing to follow. I mean, if you followed the events recently on Twitter, it's startling what happens when communities connect. And there are a lot of teachable moments in all those things. Do a tag search on democracy at the blogs of Penn State and have your mind blown at what our students are writing about it all over campus. It's thrilling when you let go of that control and you let them do some things. You don't have to make sure every student has a blog or they're podcasting to be using these technologies in an effective way. But there are so many stories that can be told just by peeling back a little bit and being a little more open-minded about the use of technology. I mean, let your students go on Flickr and do image searches for Creative Commons around tags and write about them. Do digital storytelling. Let them think creatively within the context of your course. It doesn't have to be this painful experience that I think so many of us characterize using technology in the classroom as being this thing. It's like, oh my God, it's going to blow my stuff up. There's no way I can teach 300 kids this way. Well, you're doing it already. You're using Angel. You're using Microsoft Word. You're using PowerPoint. Turn it around and try something different. Let them tell you something.
Just to add on to that, so it's an interesting idea. A lot of the sort of diffusion of innovation literature is not necessarily, it's focused on adoption of technology in a voluntary kind of sense. It seems it's not really necessarily speaking about a classroom context where students are being told that they have to use something. So, I mean, I've looked to that literature over time for guidance on how to best approach introducing new things, but in my opinion, it's somewhat limited in that, you know, a lot of the information out there is about open marketplace adoption of new innovations. So what we've settled on is really, one of the things that we've really tried to do is focus on why it's good for the students, and it's been touched on with the literacy issue. You know, I don't know how relevant it would be in terms of winning your students over to, you know, making them more amenable to new technology, but we've done a lot with trying to get information from industry that says that we want employees to be able to do X, Y, Z, and, you know, only know about engineering discipline because that's the one that we talk about at my job, but there is a lot out there in terms of what employers are expecting, and they are expecting people to be able to find things and to self-organize and to cobble together the tools they need to, you know, work as a team and make a presentation or build something. So, you know, I think there's a lot to be said for, you know, taking the steps to making it clear why it's good for them in the end. You know, like the vegetable speech. Did you want to revisit your whatever this tenure conversation thing was? I don't want to deprive you.
Deprive me of what?
Your opportunity to whatever it was. We can skip it too. We can move on.
No. Cole really wants to talk about it.
So in my line of work, I've been here for over 11, 12 years now, and started as an instructional designer. And the conversation always centered around if we could just get those damn faculty to write the content for us, right? Yeah. And then the faculty say, those damn IT people, if they just leave me alone about this content, I could get my tenure. And we've used that as from my side, I'm not speaking from yours, I'm speaking from my side. I think we've used that as an excuse and a crutch for a long time. That if the tenure process doesn't change, we can never really integrate technology into the classroom. The tenure process is the tenure process, right? It's different at different institutions, but at our institution, it's a very rigorous process. And it's going to be that way. That's one of the reasons why Penn State is such a well-regarded institution. So I think that excuse of unless we really change the tenure process, we're not going to be able to make progress is absolutely ludicrous, and I think it's a cop-out in a lot of ways, and that's what I wanted to say. So I hope I didn't piss people off too much with that. So. Or maybe I do.
Yeah, I think you did, and I'm pissed off personally.
Are you?
Yeah.
Well, let's hear it.
I agree with Cole. I don't think the tenure process is going to change. I think we can beef about it and we can say that that's what's causing all the problems. But I don't think. I mean, as a pre-tenure person, you know, I wake up at night screaming about it. But that, you know, it's not going to change. I think it's institutionalized, and there are really good reasons for it. And you know, I would like to see a wider sense of what scholarship means, but. There are real costs for that in academia. I mean, the problem is that in academia, your reputation and your ability to generate new ideas is how you live, and in an environment where those ideas go out and get retweeted within 10 seconds by somebody else and just propagate through. Social media so quickly, it's very difficult if you don't have some sort of slower, more reviewed process to sort of get a sense of whose ideas are whose, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it. So I think it is difficult, and you know, maybe someday academia will look more like the blogosphere, where you sort of build a reputation over time and then you can live on that, and they can figure out a way to evaluate it. But I don't see that coming anytime soon.
Well, I find it a little disturbing to be, and not so much the tenure thing, but to be asked, you know, give me the content, and now I'm going to create this course, and it's going to exist on its own, and because really the faculty, it's processes, and it's this kind of facilitation that takes a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge of your field and a lot of knowledge of connecting things to that field that makes to make that quality class. So you can't just hand over this content, and there's plenty of books out there, and there's books authored by faculty here. It's not just putting the book up on there or this content. It's more than that. So that's where I find, this disturbing. I don't know if you want to, say if that's what you meant.
I do too. I find the whole process disturbing. But at the end of the day, there are reasons. You started earlier by talking about the financial rewards associated with producing courses in an online universe, and those are real. And in many cases, for a lot of our colleges and departments, they are the only source of new revenue. And so processes are in place to actually make those things go. But on the other side of that, I don't do that anymore. That's not really my space anymore. I think more about resident instruction and helping faculty think about integrating technology. But it's a huge challenge on both sides of that equation. And I think the one thing that needs to happen, and I don't see anything on the program here, but it's something to continue the conversation around, is how do we change that relationship, right? How do we make that less of this thing where I'm asking you to hand over what you value, your intellectual property, your thinking, your research, and be more integrated in that process so that it actually is more of a conversation and less of this lockstep engagement. And I'm just as guilty as anyone else. I mean, when I was at IST, we had a very rigorous process. I'd pay you X amount of dollars. You'd give me 10 pages. We'd say thank you. You'd go away. But looking back on it, I did it the wrong way. I mean, I know that now looking back on it. And I think going forward, if we're going to make progress as a university that's going to serve hundreds of thousands of people, not just 100,000 people, and that's going to come through not building more buildings, it's going to come through opening up new markets on a global basis, we're going to have to rethink this whole relationship. And the idea that an online course can't come from both the students and the faculty, while it seems so radical and confusing to so many people, it's going to have to happen if we are going to scale this thing. It's the only way. I mean, we are going to have to lean on the same kind of collaborative techniques that have made Wikipedia so successful. And there will need to be maybe faculty committees behind the scenes that approve, just like there's a very serious vetting process within Wikipedia, so that it's the voice of a department maybe instead of the voice of an individual. But those are down the line. But yeah, I mean, I'm not at all saying that I want you to just hand over your stuff. I mean, I think that that's evolving, hopefully even faster than what I think.
Not really.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the question really is the same for instructional designers and faculty as it is faculty and students. I mean, it has to be about a relationship between people and building things together, and it has to be about a conversation. I mean, I think it's always about the conversation. So the problem is that there isn't enough conversation between the learning design community and faculty, and when those conversations do happen, you get amazing things. I mean, I think the faculty fellows will be able to speak to that later this afternoon. So I think just like with students and faculty, there's a lot of blaming from both sides. The students complain about the faculty and their dull lectures and their terrible classes, and the faculty complain about the students being passive and annoying and not contributing and not being like we used to be when we were students. And I think the same thing happens in the learning design and faculty community, as Cole characterized the sort of discourse that happens. So I mean, it's easy to stand on different sides of the fence and throw rocks at each other, because then it's not your fault, it's their fault. So at some point, it has to be about community engagement. It has to be about a conversation. We have to let go of this metaphor that one group has knowledge and the other group needs it in some way, in some particular way, so I can tell you what you need as instructional designers, right? I, as a faculty member, am going to tell you how to do your work, and you're going to tell me how to do mine. I mean, that doesn't make any sense at all. What makes sense is for us to have a conversation about how we can do work together that's going to be valuable and productive and contribute to the Penn State community. So I think that's what's critical, is the conversation, and it's beginning. I mean, my sense is from other institutions I've been at, the conversation's better here than it is at other places. That being said, that's sort of a sad state of the state, right? I mean, I don't know how many faculty are here, but not a lot. And so I think it's great. I think there's movement. I think Penn State can be an example of what it can be like. But I think we got a lot of institutional change to happen before it's going to be the shining example on the hill.
me say one more thing. So this goes on in K-12 too, right? So if you moderate conversations in the K-12 community, what you get is a room like this, only with teachers on one side of the room, like administrators right down front, because they always sit right down front. And then, you know, the tech people. And the teachers stand up and say, if those goddamn tech people would just let me use blah. And then literally in the same room, the tech people stand up and say, if those goddamn teachers would just understand what it means when they try to use those things. And you sit up front, you say, you guys realize that we're all right here in the same room. So this is not a unique conversation. I mean, this happens all the way through K through 20 and beyond, that there's always this conflict, and that's the, and like Scott said, that's the conversation that needs to be addressed. And I think in a lot of ways, we sort of go about our business and try not to address it in a lot of ways. But yeah.
So I think this is a good segue for a point that I want to make sure to make, and that is that the technology. So there was a question about assessing the Wikipedia assignment, and I think this is relevant generally to assessment. I regard technology the way I regard assessment, and technology and assessment I regard instrumentally. They're a means to an end, right? And the end is the thing you're trying to accomplish in the classroom. And the things that you're trying to accomplish in the classroom are not, again, they're not abstract, they're very concrete. The point of the, well, there are a lot of advantages and sort of objectives to this Wikipedia assignment. But the most important one is for students to understand what Wikipedia is, right? I want them to have that aha moment when they realize, oh, I'm Wikipedia, right? So, you know, over and over again, I hear students say, oh, we can use Wikipedia? And I'm like, well, of course you can. And it turns out that just, you know, 4 months ago when they were in high school, they were forbidden to use Wikipedia. If they're sitting in the library and Wikipedia is on the screen, it's like porn. They're in trouble. If they get caught using Wikipedia, they are in trouble. Because, I think it's because well-meaning but empty-headed, you know, teachers and librarians and whoever it is, realize that Wikipedia is not perfectly reliable by whatever standard. And rather than use that fact, that context, as sort of a framework for teaching all these important lessons, they just outlaw it. And that's not it's just such a missed opportunity, right? I mean, I don't think I'm unique here. I mean, hardly an hour goes by when I don't look up something in Wikipedia. It's such a useful tool, and it has been for me for at least 5 years, right? I mean, you're not going to use it as a cited reference, but if you've never heard of, oh, I don't know, you know, if you don't know anything about copper toxicity, type it in, and you've got a great start. There's going to be a list of references at the end. This is the first place you should go. And students are very, you know, they're intimidated by this, and there's this. I actually tried to exploit this. There's this sort of subversive thrill to using Wikipedia for a lot of them. And what I want is for them to get the insight. Wikipedia is not this anonymous thing. After you've contributed a paragraph to Wikipedia, after you've done a little bit of work and put sentences into paragraphs and paragraphs into context, then I'm hoping they'll realize, wow, you know, we are Wikipedia, and that's going to give them a whole different insight into how reliable it is and what it can be used for, what it can't be used for. And to assess that, I mean, I think it's simple. I think at the beginning of the semester, I'll give them a little questionnaire about, you know, what are your opinions about Wikipedia, what's your experience with Wikipedia, you know, how reliable do you think of it, those kind of questions. That's the same questions at the end, and I expect there to be a dramatic difference. So that's my, I'm eager to share those results with you when I get them.
I just want to add that Wikipedia is also a place for activism and empowerment, and there's a lot of things defined on there. And really, you know, while there's a lot of people defining it, a lot of voices are not in participating, and it's sort of our job as educators and what we're working with to, you know, get our students and other people we're working with. I'm doing a national sort of activism thing on redefining something on Wikipedia, and it's not easy. It keeps flipping back. So, you have to have a, you know, sort of a really activist kind of approach to that as well.
Okay, I just want to do a real quick plug that I think is relevant about the relationships and roles. Brett has a section of the wiki where you can talk about your role as a learning designer. and what it means, and obviously faculty, whoever, you're welcome to contribute. We want to kind of get a conversation going about these changing relationships and roles, and see if we can get some good stuff out of talking about those issues. So I'm 1 minute over, so I'm going to say thanks to everybody, and thank you for the great questions. And if anyone has anything they want to add in summary, now is the time. Otherwise, we will go eat some food and talk about how great this panel was. So. All right, thank you.
I just want to add that there's questions on the live question tool that we didn't get to, but we have a session tomorrow morning where it's kind of a catch-all session. We'll try to get to some of those things. So.
One more thing, during lunch, you're free to use any of the, you could go to the hub if you want, you could use this cafe area out here. On Twitter, I was talking with Nancy Hallberg. Where are you, Nancy? Oh, there you are. About watching the first part of the presentation of the Google Wave over lunch in this room. So if you want to come back here with your food, just be careful, don't spill anything. We're not technically allowed to have food in here. Also, Dean is going to end the last 15 minutes of lunch, and we'll probably go a little bit into the faculty fellow presentation with more live music. So if you want to hear Dean, come back at like 1:45.